Well, hello and welcome to Not the Jenny Show on Orange Hat Radio. This is Jenny Stevens, aka the Ukulele Girl, and this show is all about the wonderful musicians I've had the privilege of meeting over just about the last year while the world has been on pause. While we've all been staying safe at home, musical creativity has exploded, and there is a hotbed of activity going on in houses up and down the land, nationally and internationally. Over the next few weeks, I'll be introducing you to some of these artists and bands that I've been getting to know lately, and they'll be telling us how 2020 changed the trajectory of their musical careers and what's next for them in 2021. If you'd like to get in touch with the show, you can tweet me at @the_ukulele girl, and don't forget to use the hashtag #NotTheJennyShow, or NTJS for short. This is a pre-record, so I won't be reading your tweets out live on the air this evening, but I can certainly give you a shout out in next week's show. And of course I'll be responding on Twitter tonight because let's face it, I'm probably on there right now, aren't I? So tweet me at @the_ukulele girl, and don't forget to use that hashtag #NotTheJennyShow, or NTJS for short. So, on tonight's show, this band is one that formed in 1994 in Sydney, Australia, and after enjoying success on the live circuit as a three-piece, turned their attention to recording. Over the last 2 decades, they've built a seriously impressive back catalogue of albums and EPs, and now as a two-piece have just released yet another corker of a record. Yes, tonight, Not the Jenny Show is excited to present Fendahlene.
Don't seem right. Another spineless politician with a prehistoric intellect, doing anything it takes to stay friends with the gutter press. From Brussels to London, from Canberra to Capitol Hill, they're the ones screwing up, but we're the ones who have to pick up the bill. Nobody asked me how I felt. Does nobody care? This is all shot to hell. There's 2 sides of this story. I'll make up my own mind, don't make it up for me. Now I may be wrong, but something about this don't seem right. If I were listening to you with my eyes closed, I wouldn't know if you were for or opposed. It's all just semantics, why must you toe the party line? I just wanna know now what you're gonna do. If it's all the same to you, somehow I can't help thinking it's more of the same.
So, joining me now, I've got two guys to chat with today, lucky old me. Please welcome Ash and Paul, otherwise known as Fendahlene. Welcome to the show, fellas.
Thank you. Great to be here.
So it's really good to have you today. Thank you so much for coming in and chatting to me. I'm pretty excited that I finally get to talk to you because I've only met you fairly recently on Twitter. So we're going to delve into the history of Fendahlene today. But to do that, we actually need to go right back to 1994. So Paul, tell us where it all started.
Well, actually, it starts before then because we knew each other at high school. But for some reason, we never really had a band then. We sort of had a few. Well, we did. We had a band called the Arthur C. Clarke Mystery Band that's actually won a band competition in 1987. So we're going back a long way. And we'd sort of done a few gigs around then and then done nothing for sort of 5 or 6 years. And then we started jamming at the end of 94. And it was me, Ashley, and another school friend, Ben, on drums. And we basically spent a year just jamming, playing around, writing songs before our first gig, which was in December 95 in Sydney.
And I hear that the name has got a Doctor Who connection and nothing to do with guitars like I thought. Where's the name from, Ash?
We spent a long time trying to work out names, and we have some incredible scribble sheets now of some of the names we didn't pick. And then one of them was I'm the particularly big Doctor Who fan. I actually don't really know whether Paul's a massive fan, but I used to be a massive fan of Doctor Who, and they had a serial in the Tom Baker years called The Image of the Fendahl, and it was a classic, really bad 70s Doctor Who prop, like an air conditioning unit with green paper mache on it and like little ribbons coming out. It's the sort of thing you would have seen at the Nativity play in Love Actually. It was that bad. And it had 12 little kids. It was all sort of occulty. I mean, we're the least occult band ever, and they were called Fendahlene.
Amazing.
And that was fine. So we decided to pick Fendahlene, but there was a couple of problems with that. We actually had to work out how to spell it because we had no idea. And then the first couple of gigs we had, it was advertised in the trade press and all over the place. And even though we spelt the name out to the promoter, of course they spelt it wrong with an S. And it was spelt like that a couple of times. So eventually it became a positive after a while because everybody would ask you for the first 3 or 4 times, how do you spell it? Can you spell it again? How do you spell it? And eventually it kind of stuck. But yeah, so that's how we got to Fendahlene.
So, Paul, you said that you guys started gigging in 95 around Sydney. And at that point, you'd been together for about a year, writing material. What was it like going from that situation of jamming and writing to breaking out onto the live scene in Sydney?
I remember being really nervous the very first gig we played. I remember that the entire day I was, sort of freaked out by it. It was like, you spend all this time writing these songs, and this is the first time you're actually going to get up and play your own songs to other people. So that was a bit that was daunting. But after a while, when we played so much back then, you could do, back in those days, the Sydney live scene was still fairly vibrant. It's different now, I think. It's sort of died off. But there was quite vibrant. So you could do plenty of gigs. You do a few gigs a week. So we started doing a lot of gigs, and it was great. It was a really good way to improve our playing and improve. You sort of worked out what songs worked and what didn't, and it helps you learn to write songs, construct songs for an audience. So I think from about 95 to say 98 was a really sort of intense period of gigging and playing and developing for us.
Yeah, if I can add something to that as well, that first gig, I mean, I think playing so often, which having a good live scene lets you do, really helps with confidence. Because I remember that first gig. I mean, we were headlining. We sold it as our first gig and we had a lot of crowd coming. But we got to the venue at like 5 and we were on at like 10. And that was probably the longest 5 hours of our lives. And we literally would sit there. And then finally, the first act felt like 6 hours long. And we was like, when are they ever going to get off? And I look back at the photos of it now, and we look like about 12. And it's just, no wonder we were nervous, you know what I mean? So, but then seriously, by the time you keep doing it, and you have obviously your pitfalls, you have all the things that you learn through mistakes and through getting better. And then eventually, quite quickly, you can sort of just walk on stage. I mean, I absolutely miss walking on stage now. It's like a drug. It's like going to the studio.
So you guys gigged for a couple of years around the Sydney circuit, and then you came out with an EP, Blue Fortress, in around 97. Were you gigging those songs previous to releasing that EP?
Yeah, we were, because we'd done. I mean, that EP was recorded mainly through 96, so we were sort of writing those songs and playing them as we were recording them. So that these songs were that EP was a pretty good representation of what our set list was, or part of our set list was at the time. But before that, we actually did a demo, like a 12-song demo. The demo,
There's a
which
story in
hadn't been but that demo had sort of been was all the songs we'd written in our pre-gigging phase. And then we sort of used that to get gigs. And once we had gigs, we started writing a whole lot of new songs, better songs, and those sort of first, the first 6 of those formed the first EP.
We were lucky we kept going after that demo. We actually organised a demo. We went to a studio nearby where we both lived, and it was, as an indie studio in Australia, reasonably well known. And we went to the office, and some guy booked us in for a session. It turned out down the track that he didn't actually work there. Some guy that played there just sat at the desk. He just go, "Yeah, I'll book you in, mate." He didn't. Well, no one actually knew we were going. And then we got there, and we were assigned an engineer. And look, really, really lovely guy, and he's actually a really good sound engineer for film. But when we said, "Look, we need to demo," we got there at midday. We hadn't started by 7:00. He was setting up microphones left, right, and centre. He wanted to put a microphone on the drummer's heart. He wanted to put one against a piece of corrugated iron, and we literally did. We didn't get started till about 8:00 on the first day for demo. And this can't be this hard. No wonder it cost Fleetwood Mac so much to make an album. It got better.
That's quite funny. So how would you describe the sound that you were creating right back then in 97 on Blue Fortress? For anyone who hasn't heard that EP, how would you describe the sound?
I'd say it's fairly raw indie rock. It was sort of, indie pop rock. So, there's some songs there that are kind of, they're all guitar-based songs. Some of the songs are sort of fairly slight punk influence. Some songs have, well, there's a song with acoustic guitar and violin, so it's a bit of a mixture. Really. It's kind of a mixed bag. That EP. But I guess at its core, it is a sort of a 3-piece guitar rock band playing sort of fairly loud indie rock. I'd say is so it's a good representation of where we were at the time.
And what artists were influencing the sound that you were creating, Ash? What artists were you listening to at that time and being influenced by?
Oh, I mean, our influences have kind of been. I mean, Paul and I were influenced even at high school by the sort of the great 60s and 70s rock bands and the indie rock bands, and a lot of soul music and also country rock as well.
Oh wow!
And I suppose you can also hear on this. Even though we were never really a grunge band, we were obviously massive grunge fans. I mean, we both saw Nirvana live, which is something that a lot of people can't say, which is awesome.
Wow.
And I think there's a couple of songs there where you can really hear not so much grunge, but that real sort of dredgy, slow, menacing sort of feeling that you get. It was kind of a bit of a mix from everything, because I think there's a song on there, the one you mentioned with strings, which I don't know what you would say would influence that. Probably Beatles, to be honest.
Also the start of that, just so everyone knows, it was a rip-off of Led Zeppelin. So it was like,
okay, there you go.
So what first got you into creating music as youngsters? I mean, you mentioned that you were in high school bands, but what first got you into creating music yourselves and picking up instruments yourselves? Was it those artists that you were listening to, Paul?
Yeah, it was. I mean, I've always loved the Beatles, and I always wanted to play Beatles songs. And I started playing guitar when I was 13, and I hated it. I would just dread going to guitar lessons. And eventually the guitar teacher said, "Look, you're not enjoying it. What do you want to learn?" I said, "I want to learn how to play Beatles songs, how to play the solo and Get Back." So he said, "Okay, fine." So he showed me how to play. He showed me how to work out solos on songs from listening to it. And once I knew that, I was away, and I thought, this is great. And then I started to really enjoy playing guitar. I used to play with my cousin, who's a great guitarist. I used to play with him. And then Ash got a bass. We were about sort of 15 at the time. Ash got a bass, so we used to sort of mess around and jam. And it was just, initially it was just playing songs of the Beatles and the Stones and some Australian bands.
Yeah, Australian bands as well. I think the Australian music scene was quite prolific. I mean, some of it spilt over internationally. Obviously, you've got Midnight Oil and Excess, but Australia has got a very, very strong independent music scene and rock music scene, and everybody's influenced by it to a degree.
How old were you when you first picked up a bass, Ash?
I was 15. I actually didn't even pick up a guitar for probably a year after I picked up a bass. I was a massive Beatles fan as well and a Stones fan. But I think for me, when I got into bass was after a holiday, and I came back, and this is going to sound quite weird, but a mixture of discovering The Who, and I loved John Entwistle, and I modelled my style on John Entwistle. And also T-Rex. I know it's kind of, it was so daggy in that time to suddenly have a T-Rex record. there was something so rock starry glammy about it, and the bass sound for me, and it was like something I was like, this is my instrument. And I went and had lessons as well, and I was hooked instantly. That's how I became a bass player by heart. Yeah, 15.
Wow. You both spent time growing up in North America. I was reading, Paul, you were in Boston for a while, and Ash, you were in Toronto. How old were you when you were growing up in North America, Paul?
When I was 10 to when I was 12. And that's interesting too. That's a really formative time, and that changed my musical influences as well. Because when I was there, I mean, the Stones were touring at the time, so I remember I had friends who had older brothers who went to the Stones concert. Then I was like, wow, that's really cool. And there's a whole raft of different bands around, that were popular then, Boston. So bands like the Cars and bands like the J. Giles Band and those sorts of bands. So as well as the Who were big then as well in the States. So just those sorts of things, just they all feed into help build your sort of musical style.
Yeah. I was in Toronto from age 6 till nearly 10. So during the Eisenhower administration, no, not kidding. I was there, and it was so in the 70s, and the two things I remember from that is seeing my first proper concert, which was the Beach Boys.
Wow.
At Toronto Exhibition Stadium, and it was all 6 of them. It was the main band plus Bruce Johnson, and I remember obviously the music was amazing and the show was spectacular. And Dennis was still alive, so it was the full experience. But also the thing I remember is that's where I discovered glow sticks. And when you're a kid, you just go, "What is that green thing, man? Can I have one of those? Can I have one of those?" And the other thing I remember watching live on television, because the sort of that tradition then was on Saturdays and Sundays as a kid, you'd watch cartoons all morning, and probably watch sport in the afternoon. I remember watching the Disco Sucks rally at, I think it was Comiskey Park in Chicago. And basically, the promoter, they had a big stop middle of the 7th inning. They put a couple of garbage tins out, put all these disco records on it. The big sign said, "Disco sucks." And they blew it all up. And you just don't forget those things. I mean, that was quite a formative thing for us. But I was there during disco. So, yeah, doesn't really rub off too much.
So all those influences that sort of went into a melting pot, can you hear those influences in your early work, like your album Anyone Who's Anyone? Can you sort of pick out those influences in that album, Paul?
Probably no, actually. I mean, probably here and there you can. I think those influences actually come through more now. I think at the time, if I think back to that album, I think we were more trying to be. I think the style of the songs on that album were more similar to sort of the Australian music scene at that time. So I think you'd find some influences there, but I think those older influences have kind of percolated through more now rather than then. Because I think then it was much more sort of focused around what was happening in the Sydney scene at the time. I think.
Yeah, I mean it was the 90s, and you kind of, as a rock band in the 90s, you kind of wanted to just be like a rock band in the 90s. It was and we came at the end of grunge and then through Britpop and all the other 90s rock, and you didn't really think about going, oh, you know what, I love that Bee Gees album, Main Course, let's do some of the stuff in there. You just didn't do that when you're in your early years, you know what I mean?
Well, actually, on that note, we're going to play one of your more recent songs now, and that's Can't Feel This Way, which is the next single that's going to be released off your current album, High and Low and Back Again. So this is Fendahlene and Can't Feel This Way.
Were dealt, it was high time. We all know what we've done. Mix of pride and indecision. Couldn't see the devil in us. I can't feel this way. Seduced by bones, no meat. Blindsided by deceit. I can't feel this way. We were so wrong, so slack, amnesiacs. It's all tip and no iceberg, marching on your feet of clay. You changed the rules and we rode shotgun, trampled blindly over our fears. I way. Seduced by bones, no meat, gone in a heartbeat. I can't feel this way. We were so blank, so slow. History says hello. It was all something for nothing. Just we talk out both sides of your mouth. Your time will come, you'll get yours yet. If we wake up and make up with the truth.
So given that the world has gone a little bit crazy this past year and we can't be in the same room as each other anymore, what does your creative process look like now when you're working on a track, Ash?
I think in terms of writing, I'm not going to speak for myself because obviously we've written both individually as a team. I am finding things so prolific these days. Obviously you've got more time, but you kind of have to focus on writing and lyrics, writing lyrics and writing music, and it also helps you experiment. And we talked about the influences before the break, and I think at the moment you go, oh, why don't we try this? Why don't we try this? Because it's kind of the right environment for that. I mean, on the flip side, I've seen Paul twice in person in 12 months, and I actually haven't seen him because once he was a second story window, and once was another 3 meters away. So not only have not even played together, we launched the album last year. We were meant to have a photo shoot in March. We still haven't had a photo shoot, so we're still using mocked up photos. I mean, everything stopped. So I think one of the things when everything stopped, you get frustrated trying to adjust. We launched an album during it, which was interesting, but then you kind of go, well, okay, well, how do we move on? How do we get moving? Why don't we use the time to write? And at least for me, I'm just finding so much more inspiration in writing and exploring, the creative limits a bit more.
Paul, what's your experience been like? Would you agree with what Ash just said, or has it been different for you?
No, I think I agree. I think it's been interesting. I think we've got a ton of new ideas. I mean, it's just amazing how many new ideas we've got. Just keeping track of them is like sort of tricky. And I think the thing is, the problem is you get all these ideas and you sort of half finish one and move on to the next one. And you sort of forget what you've done, and it's almost like end up this massive pile of half finished. So, which is it's a great problem to have, but it's like I've got to get these all finished one day. But yeah, I think we've written more songs in the last 12 months than we've written in the previous 5 years. So I think it's been really good from that perspective. And it's been good just from the point of view of just playing the guitar. I've been really focusing on just almost relearning the guitar. Practicing different techniques and styles and really getting my sound down. So that's been quite good to do that because I haven't done that for years. So it's there are some definite positives. It'd be nice to be able to get together again and actually finish the songs and play them and record some proper demos and start thinking about the next thing. But that'll happen eventually.
What does your home studio setup look like, Ash?
I don't really have I'm actually sitting in it, so I should be able to give you a bird's eye view now I think about it. It's half of an office where we are downstairs, and I have half the room to use. So everything's sort of set up. I mean, I've got the keyboard, the amp, a couple of basses, and a guitar set up. A couple of mics. I'm looking at 3 or 4 mics, but it's good for rehearsing. It's good for doing basic demos. I think in terms of recording, though, I mean, we've never really done the home recording to release thing. I mean, we're really a studio band, and I think for that is we started that way back in the day when the first EP we did on tape. In fact, we did tape a couple of them, and there's something about going into a studio from, say, 10 o'clock in the morning till 8, 9 at night, 3, 4, 5 days in a row, that just changes you as a musician. You get into this zone and you can just lock off, and you can come out. You can go in with, we're going to do 4 songs in this session. You can come in and they can come out completely different to what you're expecting. And, at the same time, get 10 minutes to go on this one, and you end up writing a great lyric or a bit of a bass line in. So it's kind of part urgent, part you're stuck in time. And also, we've got used to having the studio sound. I mean, I think that's one of the things I think with us is that we like to have that sort of professional sound that's done, and we like to have people help us do it. So we Paul and I do stuff. I mean, Paul can talk about his studio as well, but I mean, we do odds and ends and a little bit of editing here and there, but there's nothing that we would ever release properly, I think, as a single.
You record at Urchin Studios in London, don't you, normally?
We recorded, the last album at Urchin, and hopefully, if they'll take us back, of course, if they're listening, hopefully we will do that work there as well. We also did our demos there, which I found was really helpful, because, I mean, the input we got from them was out of this world.
I mean, the relationship with the engineer can, make or break a record, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, Paul, when I first found you guys back in December, one of the first things I did was hightail it over to your YouTube to see what you guys had on there. And I love the fact that you've got these lockdown videos on there of you playing some of your songs. What's the reaction been to those videos? Do your fans like the fact that they can still sort of get access to you even in 2020 when you're not out on the road?
Yeah, it's been good. I've been quite surprised by how positive it's been. We sort of did it just as this was a way of sort of staying out there and staying in front of people. And it was, we weren't quite sure how to do it, but Ash figured it out. So he's the technical person. We got it all working, and it's been great. And they're quite fun to do actually. And one of the most fun ones to do wasn't one of our songs. It was a song of cover version of a song by the La La Letts. The song's called Northeast. Great song. So let's do that.
Cracking song. And that was a really interesting experiment. We want to do more of that because it kind of feels like, even obviously it's not our song, I kind of want to play it live in our set now, and I always want to go and record it in the studio. And you never would have done that without that sort of video thing. I mean, we've been around forever, and I think we've kind of never been that much of a video band. I used to be quite militant as a musician, musicians make music. We're a big Pearl Jam fan. We're massive Pearl Jam fans. And I think we were with Eddie Vedder in the time in the 90s. We're not performers, we're not actors while we're making a video. I think that has softened since lockdown for me, that I can totally see the value in it. And I can totally see the entertainment in it, which is, why we've got so many songs over so many years, but only, a handful of videos, I guess.
So you mentioned that you covered a song by the La La Letts there, and they're one of the bands that I've found recently on Twitter as well. How did you discover the whole indie music community on Twitter first of all, Ash?
That's a really good question. We launched a single early from our album in June last year. The song was called Burnt Out. And a few sort of the retweet people, there's a retweeter, and Martina Dorner in Germany picked it up and put it to playlists, and suddenly you notice a couple of other names. And sort of you start following and listening. And then about a month later, I think somebody invited us onto a playlist, and that's when we met a whole lot of the bands that we consider, fantastic bands, like, for example, Portobello Express in Austria, the Post-Industrial Poets, the Pinstripes in Sweden, and many more. I remember those guys from the very beginning, and sort of the ones that interacted with us. And it's such an interesting community. I mean, I had a bit of a rant online yesterday because, back in the 90s with the indie music scene, it was so different, I think, because it was limited space for review and limited airplay options, and because no internet, so all the bands that we used to play with were really competitive, and they would pretty much walk over you to get to whatever they wanted to do. And Paul and I hated it, and I think we could probably count the friendships we have from that era probably on one hand from the music scene. This is entirely 180 degrees, 360, 180 degrees is the correct number. It's completely different. I mean, this is like a whole supportive community, but it's all peers of people who make really great music. And also the thing I found is that because of the internet, we're now having access to so many different genres of music that some things I never really listened to, some things I didn't appreciate. And it's like the whole world of music has opened up within this indie community.
It is quite an amazing community. I've been so pleasantly surprised by how generous and supportive all these other bands are. And last week on the show, I had Storm of Crows.
Oh, yeah.
And Matt, who is a massive Fendahlene fan.
Likewise.
Oh, really?
Yeah, love those guys.
He was talking to me about the fact that he'd just taken delivery of your back catalogue that he'd purchased on Bandcamp Friday. And he was stunned at the amount of material that you guys have put out. I mean, it's basically 20 plus years worth of discography, which is an immense amount of music for any band. Are you surprised when you look back at how much you've written and recorded over the years, Paul?
Yeah, it's funny I don't usually think about it, but if you sit down and look at it all, you think, man, there's a lot of stuff here. And what I find funny as well, actually I always find this, is that because we played so many gigs when we were younger, when we get back together and we play, the new songs we can never remember them. The old stuff, all the old stuff, like we know them inside out. Those songs, all those old songs are just ingrained with the muscle memory of all those songs. It's hilarious.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's quite funny. So, okay, right, I'm going to put you on the spot now. So, of all of the albums and EPs you've put out, we've got Blue Fortress EP, we've got Touchdown EP, we've got Anyone Who's Anyone album, and A Decade of Near Misses. So, pre your most recent album. So, what was your favourite track to play of those old ones?
Oh, to play live?
Yeah.
I used to really enjoy playing Before I Know It, which is the first song on Anyone Who's Anyone. Just because I always liked the song, and it's just, we always played it well. It always sounded good. And I sort of, it's still, when I play it now, it still resonates for me when I sing it. So that's always been my favourite. There's other songs I might like better, but they're not as easy to play, or they're not as, they don't have the sort of, the visceral sort of, feel of Before I Know It. So that would be my favorite.
Yeah, I had two songs. I mean, Falling Fast for me, because it's quite a melodic bass line for me. I mean, you can probably tell I like playing some melodic bass depending on the song. And it just, when it worked on stage, it was just gorgeous. And there's actually a video of us on stage. One of the few videos of us, in fact, is on our YouTube channel, is us playing that at a venue called the Cat and Fiddle Hotel back in, I think it was 2002.
Yeah, I've seen that one, yeah.
And when it worked, and as a three-piece, it sounded like six players on there, and that's what I really liked about that song.
If you had to pick a song that you loved off your album just to listen to around the house, could you pick just one, Ash? Or are they like your kids where you can't really pick one?
Yeah, I think sometimes depending on the mood, you can pick a different song. But it's really difficult to go, this is my standout favourite, because also sometimes, I can tell you after a few whiskeys late at night, when the insomniacs around us are, hanging around Twitter or reading a book or watching TV, some of those Fendahlene songs are really good, because cool, it's really dark. It's, it all depends on the mood, I guess.
When you guys are writing, how do you go about writing tracks? Do you both write lyrics? Do you both write riffs? Paul, how does it normally work?
It depends. I think riffs are easy to write. I think just judging by the fact I've got loads of riffs lying around, so I think riffs and chord progressions are quite easy, and then lyrics often take a lot longer to sort of. I always find it quite difficult once you've got a melody and a chord progression. Fitting lyrics, that's often quite difficult. So I think sometimes the easiest songs to write are the ones where everything just comes at once. They just suddenly got it, and they're the ones that are often the best songs that appear out of nowhere, and you kind of get them they arrive within 10 minutes and they're done.
Yeah.
But I think there's all different ways. I think that's the best way. But usually I find that I'm just writing riffs and progressions and melodies, and then eventually you've got to try and find lyrics that fit with it. I don't think it's very rare for me, at least, to have just a set of lyrics that I put music to. I haven't done that much.
And when you look back at an album, so like let's take High and Low and Back Again as an example, that being your most recent album, are there songs which are your songs and songs which are Ash songs, or by the time the album's done and dusted, are they all just Fendahlene songs?
It's probably a mix of both, really. I think there's so much that we do together, especially in the studio, that they just become Fendahlene songs. I mean, but it depends. I mean, a song like "Can't Feel This Way," I think that's a good example where they were Ash's lyrics, and we had an original sort of chord progression for that. But then we kind of changed it around the studio quite a bit. Like the version you hear now is not much there's nothing really like the demo. So I think that's an example of a song that probably was Ash's song, but we kind of turned it into a Fendahlene joint effort. We changed it around a bit, and probably they're all, there's an element of that in all of them, I think.
Ash, one of the things I find that is constantly happening to me since I found this amazing community of musicians on Twitter is that I'm constantly learning from other people. Now, being that you guys have been around for so long, are you still able to learn things from other musicians? Are you picking up bits of knowledge and advice?
More than ever, to be perfectly honest. I think when you're in a live circuit like we were before, you kind of tend to anchor in your own genre, because you don't. Promoters are not going to put a mixed bill up most places, depending on the venue. I mean, occasionally festivals, but and we've done a few, but very rarely are they going to go with such a mix. So I think this whole experience, especially, as I said, since June when we came online, basically upped our online game, is that I learn more pretty much every week than I was probably learning in a year. And it's things from appreciation of different techniques and styles to approaches. I'm loving, for example, one of our songs in the album has this, I love, this backwards guitar solo, which I can now hear it in different ways by different people, and I can just hear it in little mixes, and I'm constantly learning different ways to do things from a much broader suite of music that I'm listening to.
The song we're actually going to be playing next off the album is Here and Now. Tell me, Ash, why are we playing that one today? What's special about that one?
That's a really good question. It's one of the songs on the album I suppose we haven't really promoted yet, so maybe a lot of people may not have heard it. It's quite close to me because it's got a very heavy melodic bass line in it throughout the song, which is it's quite noticeable, and I think it's a different form of driving the song. But on top of that, I really like the original melody that Paul did for that. And I think the sentiment of the song and the sentiment of the lyrics, I think I'd really like more people to hear it if possible.
Well, there's no time like the present, so let's give it a spin now. Okay, so this is Here and Now.
Sunday nights watching red tail lights, the pulse of the city streets. Feels like you're locked in a pattern, just climbing a ladder. Everything is routine. You wonder who you're meant to be. Is it all just a waste of time? Is there more further on up the line? There's no point waiting around. There's only here and now. We've got to take notes about tomorrow. Who cares what they expect? Let's just live instead. We've got the rest of our lives to get old. We could talk till the sun comes up, making plans for whatever may come. But in the future, who wins and who loses, it's all just a game. Not every great song will get sung. Don't keep me waiting around. Don't leave me alone in this town. There's no point waiting around. There's only here and now. We've got today. Who knows about tomorrow? Who cares what they expect? Let's just live instead. We've got the rest of our lives to get old. It all seems worlds away, so far from where you thought it would be. We'll never know how far we can go if we never even try. You could spend your life looking back at what could have been done differently. But there's no use in regret. You can't second guess where things might have led. It was all meant to be. There's no point waiting around. There's only here and now. We've got
So I guess we feel we know you pretty well by now, but what I'd like you to do is tell us something about Fendahlene or yourselves that we don't already know. It could be music or otherwise. And Paul, I'm going to throw that one at you first.
Well, I think one of the funniest gigs we ever had was playing the support act to a cartoon dinosaur. So
Wait, what? What? Reverse. You did what?
we, you know the band The Wiggles? They had that's an Australian children's band, and they had a dinosaur called Dorothy the Dinosaur. And back in the early 2000s, we were the support act for Dorothy the Dinosaur.
That is quite. Can you give us a visual of what Dorothy the Dinosaur looked like for those of us who've never seen this before?
About 5 feet tall, sort of green, fluffy kind of dinosaur, like a walking stegosaurus. You know, they know what a stegosaurus looks like, on an upright stegosaurus. I will say this: that the lady who was playing Dorothy the Dinosaur was quite. We met her backstage, and she was fairly surly. I don't know. I just don't think she appreciated us or our music.
Yeah, I mean, if you can imagine those, I don't know if you know the Wiggles. I mean, they're quite a big kids band. I mean, you know those sort of bands that aim at like preschool children. There was 4 musicians there. One was dressed all in red. One was dressed head to toe in yellow. One's dressed head to toe. And look, they were fantastic. They're actually, funny enough, they were an independent Sydney band who were quite successful called the Cockroaches, but they found masses more success becoming a children's band.
In fact, they played Madison Square Garden. That's how big they are. They played
Madison Square. Yeah.
They met Robert De Niro, all this thing. But so we supported their dinosaur, Dorothy.
Well, that is quite a fact. I would defy any even diehard Fendahlene fan to have known about that one. So after Dorothy the Dinosaur, then the Glebe Street Fair was probably not a big deal for you guys when that came around in 2004. I mean, how do you top Dorothy the Dinosaur? Ash, what was that like playing that fair?
Well, that was the Dorothy the Dinosaur Fair. So it was.
Oh, it was that one.
It was fairly reptilian, as we talked about. It was a fascinating. For those of people that know Sydney, Glebe Point Road's kind of an inner city. It's basically call it bohemian or sort of artsy area of Sydney. It's a really long street. So at the very end of the street, they put up quite a big stage, and that's where everybody played. And it was fascinating because the people are quite basically only street width, but could go as far as the eye could see. It was absolutely fun. It was so good. It was so much fun. And because it's a festival and it was a family festival as well, you had all mixes. I mean, you'd have the little kids come and do their kid dances in front, and you had proper fans as well, and people from their balconies, because there's a block of flats literally 3 meters next to us on the right-hand side of the stage. So people probably coming out going, "What the hell are you doing? What noise are you making?" But it was fantastic, and yeah, it was a real highlight.
Given that you've had so much live experience over the years, have you ever had a terrible gig, Paul?
Terrible? Yeah, we've had plenty of terrible gigs. I think we've I mean, terrible in terms of funny. I mean, there's just funny gigs. There was one gig we played in Sydney, which wasn't so much terrible for us. There's this place we used to play, we used to play there midweek, and it was always empty. But we'd go there for practice, really, because it was they had this amazing PA. So it was like, let's just go there. And let's just do the gig, because it's like you play in this stadium PA to no one, but it was just really good fun. But one week we went there to play, and there was another band who we were supporting, and they took themselves quite seriously. And we did our set to 2 people. One of whom was the mixing engineer, and the other person was
been there.
Ashley's girlfriend. and then the other band gets ready, and they said, they were getting ready to go on stage, and they went to the mixing engineer and they said, before we go on, is there a sort of another room or somewhere else we can go? And the engineer said, there was a closet over there near the stage. That'll do, that's fine. And all these guys sort of cram in. There's about 6 of them. They cram into this room. And then someone makes this announcement. And coming up next, it is, I won't say their name, blah, 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 blah. And out they come sort of trooping out of this closet as if it's like the backstage area. They come trooping onto the stage to their audience, which was us.
That's right.
Oh, yeah. Maybe I was rehearsing the theatrics of it, but it was funny.
I think the thing is, when you want to play, we played whenever we get a gig, and we played big and small. We used to play midweek. we'd play things like leagues, clubs, and almost like bowling clubs. So, for example, there was one, the Wollongong Leagues Club, which we played quite a bit. The stage was right underneath a massive TV screen. We played on a football game night one night, and literally in the middle of an acoustic song, because it was one of we've gone through many stages where we've not played with drummers, and many when we have. Quite literally in the middle, you just hear, "Oh, what a great try!" And then the commentators like literally through the screen, and then you just have to sort of go along with it. Yeah, we've had plenty of those sort of gigs.
Oh, that's funny. So previous to 2020, when obviously playing live is not possible at all, but previous to that, would you have considered yourselves more of a live act or more of a recording act, Paul?
I think the last sort of 10 years would be more of a recording act, I'd say. I mean, I just think just because of logistics and those sorts of things, it's been easy just to be a recording act and to write. And I think as well, I think the music that we play, the music we record, it's although there's only two of us plus a drummer, there's a lot of guitar parts and keyboard parts and different things. So reproducing the recorded sound is sort of tricky. So compared to the old days where it was there was three of us playing it, and it was what was on the record was kind of three of us playing it. It was the same sort of thing. Now I think we're much more of a recording act, but that's not the thing I would play.
And if things were to open up and sort of get more back to normal, can you see yourselves going back out on the road, or do you think you would just keep things in the studio going forward, Ash?
Oh no, definitely live. I wouldn't necessarily say the road, especially as we can't really go to Europe at the moment thanks to Brexit. But in terms of gigging, absolutely. I mean, we were planning 2 sets of gigging starting this last year with the album. Paul and I were going to try and play a lot of sort of 2-person acoustic, semi-acoustic gigs. And we had planned to put together a band for electric shows. And it was a band, we used a session drummer for the recording, for example. And having somebody so professional, I mean, they can pick this stuff up in 3 seconds flat. We were thinking of just getting people who would be ready for it. And the plan was to sort of play a selected number of, like, for example, an album launch, which never happened, as an electric band. And, here and there having people who could just do it when something came up. And then Paul and I were hoping to play a lot of acoustic stuff. And, yeah, so obviously we'd love to do that again. I mean, I love playing live. I mean, I love the studio as well. It's in an ideal world, we'd be doing both.
So in an ideal scenario for 2021, what does the next 6 months look for you in an ideal scenario, Paul?
It would be great to get back into the studio to do some demos. I think in a few days, getting all these new ideas down, getting them all recorded, and then sort of from there, working out which ones to properly record for a release. So ideally it would be getting these 25 odd ideas demoed, and then hopefully releasing at least a single within 6 months. 9 months, when see how things go. But it'd be nice to get a few of those songs properly recorded, so we can release 2 or 3 singles over a period of time, and then sort of get to work on the next album.
Yeah, we're gonna work on a pipeline in 12-month periods, and it's probably the best way to approach it. Having learnt from having done the album, which was a lovely thing to do, and I mean we love it to death. But you can't kind of do that all the time. It's a luxury to do that for every release, unless you're making a lot more income from the music. But definitely you can do. We do plan a proper pipeline of music coming out.
So the current album that's out now, High and Low and Back Again, we're playing a few tracks from that today. For anyone who hasn't listened to much of that album yet, what themes are you dealing with in that album, Ash?
It's interesting. I mean, we started off with a bunch of songs, and when we started recording them a couple of years ago, actually. And as it was sort of being recorded, we started sort of feeling there was kind of an overall narrative throughout the album. And then towards the end of the recording, with the last few songs, we started tailoring them towards that theme. And I think the idea of High and Low and Back Again is overall a bit of a journey. Which is kind of represented by the songs, and it's an emotional journey. It's a long journey where you do have your ups and downs, and then there's all these sort of, I think, quite introspective and quite detailed songs invoking those sort of emotions throughout. I mean, this is what I think. I mean, the first song, Burnt Out, and the last song, Dead and Gone, we actually end up doing as bookends, which sort of begin the journey and end the journey. And then throughout that journey, you can have a big up, like a recent single of ours, which is A New Thread, which is about taking a chance with new beginnings. you can have. I mean, there's many songs like that we've talked about. But I think for me, and I think it's funny because you probably ask Paul, he might give you a different answer. In fact, what I find interesting about the songs on the album, even after we recorded it, when someone would ask me, for example, what do you think High and Low and Back Again is, and I'd tell them, and Paul would say something different.
Oh, wow.
I think even for us, it's about how it might be more about a bottle of emotion at a time that we've written these things, not necessarily this is specifically about that. But if you ask Paul, I think he'd give you a different answer. He may give you a different answer.
Go on, Paul.
Well, I think the thing is, these songs, often you don't know what they're about until you've written them, and you think, what is that about? Oh, what was it? Or you might think it's about something, and then actually it's something about something else. So it's so much of it's subconscious, I suppose. But I think I kind of like I like songs that, like the fact that Ash said he thought they were about one thing, and I said they're about something else. The fact that people put their own interpretations on them is good. I think that's a good thing. So I think songs should be universal. So if people, whatever they mean to the listener is what it means. That's sort of how I approach it. I mean, like if you look at Burnt Out and Dead and Gone, they were kind of written as being burnt out with technology and fed up with the online world and that sort of thing. But then again, it might not be that. Maybe it's burnt out of life. It could be however you interpret it is what it is, and it's I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, we did an interview recently, and the song "Can't Feel This Way." The interviewer sort of told us what they thought it was about, and it was so. I mean, I'm pleased they came up with a different interpretation, but it was so far off base. It was like, whoa, I've never even thought about that for that song, to be honest. And I think that was really important for us. I mean, to try not nail ourselves down so obviously. And we have written songs like that in the past where it can only be about one thing. I mean, we wrote a song about George W. Bush, and clearly it was about George W. Bush. But it's nice to have that sort of versatility in how people accept those songs.
You both just mentioned Dead and Gone, which is actually the track we're going to be closing out the show with in a little while. And you mentioned that it could be interpreted as being about the online world. So with that, I'd actually like you to shout out your socials in case anybody wants to come and find you, listen to your songs, follow what you're up to. Ash, could you shout out your socials for people?
Yes, twitter.com/Fendahlene, F for Freddie. I shoot that right, otherwise we'll repeat the mistake from 1995. F for Freddie, ENDAHLENE. You'll also find the same at Instagram, Facebook, Bandcamp, which is where you'll find the album as well. YouTube.
Fantastic.
I think I've got all of them.
And definitely go and check out their lockdown videos on YouTube because I love them. So we are going to close out the show with Dead and Gone, it's the last single which is going to be released off the album High and Low and Back Again, right, Paul?
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Well, listen, thank you boys so much for coming and chatting to me today. I've really enjoyed getting to know you a little bit better.
Thanks, Jen. That was a blast. Thanks. It was really fun.
So here we go. This is Fendahlene with Dead and Gone. I'll see you on the socials, boys.
Cheers, Jen. Thanks. Bye.
Heaven forbid I do this wrong. Do I have to play along? Interpretations, diatribe, scattergun, undignified. Someone tell me what's the allure? What makes you think you're so pure? There was a time I'd bite my tongue. We never were so highly strung. Those days are dead and gone. Am I the only one who still can recall the way everything once was? Give me the printed word. Don't want my life deferred by an endless script of zeros and ones, zeros and ones. still can recall the way everything once was. Give me the printed word that's a warm life deferred by an endless script of zeros and ones, zeros and ones. With bated breath, full steam ahead, anxiety, sense of dread. It's time to jump into the fray. There used to be another way. Those days are dead and gone. Am I the only one who still can recall the way everything once was? Give me the printed word to warm my life deferred by an endless script of zeros and ones, zeros and ones, zeros and ones, zeros and ones, zeros and ones. Those days are dead and gone. Am I the only one who still can recall the way everything once was?
So there goes Fendahlene. I loved chatting with those guys today. Why don't you head on over to Twitter and see them, say hello, give them a follow so you can keep up to date with what they're doing musically. You'll find them at Fendahlene, that's F for Freddie, ENDAHLENE. And as we said, you can stream and download their music on all music platforms, including Spotify, iTunes, and all the usual stores. And that's all we've got time for today. Thank you for joining me for this episode of Not the Jenny Show. I hope you've enjoyed it. And I do hope you'll join me next week when my guest will be Michael Lind of the Blindfold Experience. So get your questions into me on Twitter at @the_Ukulele Girl. And don't forget to use that hashtag Not the Jenny Show, or NTJS for short. And I'll do my best to put them to Mike next week. So it's goodbye from me, Jenny Stevens, aka the Ukulele Girl. And goodbye from Orange Hat Radio. I'll see you on the socials.
Not the Jenny